Hello and welcome to Sports Scene Summer Edition Season 12, Episode 1. It is May 27th of 2020 and we still don't have sports. We are hoping and we are waiting. I am so glad to be joined with my team all across America. We got Tyler Meyerly down in Corona, California, Aiden back in Los Angeles, and Reagan in Memphis. I'm back in my home state of Michigan, still on lockdown. Guys, how have you been?
Good. How are you doing, Sam?
We're hanging, man. We're hanging by. We're almost out of this, man. We got some good news today, some reassuring news, and some things to be hopeful about for once. It's been a rough 3 months since sports were canceled, but we got a lot to look forward to. I want to start it off. Aiden, we changed the format of the show a little bit. We got 3 of us coming with news stories to kind of discuss, be the little pseudo expert on, and then 1 hot take coming from Reagan Griffin today. So stay tuned to the end for that. I'm going to start it off. Aiden, your story. What do you got for us?
Yeah, you said it's optimistic news. Anybody who follows USC knows the Pac-12 announced yesterday that it's going to be lifting restrictions on voluntary in-person workouts for athletes, and that those can start on June 15th. I'm going to get a little bit more into some of the protocols in a little bit, but it's important to note how this follows after the SEC and the Big 12, who both also recently announced that players could come in for voluntary activities. I think that the voluntary part is very important to that. No players have to come in if they're feeling uncomfortable about, still the situation of the coronavirus, but it's going to be more in like small groups and working on conditioning stuff that's overseen by the strength and conditioning coaches. That's kind of what players are going to be mostly doing. And it mostly targeted football. I know for the Big 12, I believe, it originally was just for football players, and then they updated it so that it included all sports. Or no, I'm sorry, that's the NCAA in general. So originally targeted at football players, now it applies, and basketball players, now it applies to everyone. And like I said, the SEC will be starting June 8th with those voluntary workouts. And then the Big 12 will be starting also on June 15th for football, and then July 1st for other fall sports. So I wanted to get your opinions on this stuff, you guys. Does this make you more optimistic about when sports are going to be coming back, specifically these college sports, and maybe even more specifically the college football season?
I mean, it's hard to not be optimistic about this. You wouldn't have a plan in place to come back, and you wouldn't say, okay, you guys can come back if they weren't considering to have a season at this point, right? It's always been in the back of their minds. We know they want to have football. We know they want to have other sports too, but football being the most important, being that money grabber where they get all their finances. A lot of these schools, the football program finances every other sport they have, right? So this gives some optimism to it, and I think the Pac-12 is in a good place, better than a lot of people thought, because a lot of people were saying they were going to be the ones holding out. Obviously, a lot of their schools have been, the cities that their schools are in have been affected drastically. Washington, Los Angeles, so that wasn't reassuring, and of course the Bay Area too. But I definitely think it is reassuring news.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Sam. Everybody thought the Pac-12 would be the last conference to kind of jump on board. So it's hard not to be optimistic when it comes to rolling into these things. But Aiden, you also mentioned that, one, this is voluntary. So nobody's forcing anybody that's uncomfortable. So they're kind of curbing that issue. But the second is that this is the first step. At least my biggest concern was safety and health, like physique-wise of these players. It takes a lot that goes into the game of football specifically compared to other sports, that you need that time of training on campus with the strength coaches. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into, limiting the amount of people in the same room, still conducting meetings virtually where you can. But I think this is the first step we need to see widespread. Like we said, the majority of the Power Five has started to make these moves. It's those smaller schools that might not benefit as much from this, but it starts at the top, and I think Pac-12, Big Ten, those are the big ones that needed to step up at first.
I'm hyped, man. I mean, as a Trojan supporter, right? You knew this was going to be a year that you wanted to see this team play. The thought of having all of this young talent finally about to come to fruition, and then to be able to not see that would have been an extremely frustrating thing. And then obviously I lived in the South, man. Like I'm in Memphis, Tennessee right now. Don't nobody want to not see college football. These people live and breathe for it. That's kind of disseminated its way into myself as well. So it definitely, the thought of not having a college football season was a bit concerning. So this is definitely positive. You just always, you want to think about the players involved and make sure that their safety is coming first and foremost. Not just even the players, but the staff as well. I know there were a lot of concerns with a lot of teams having older staff members on the team. Those guys might not be able to come and be part of that initially. Maybe not even for the entirety of the season. So, as greedy for football as we can be, we always have to keep those things in mind. But it seems like the NCAA and the individual conferences are doing a pretty good job of that. thus far. We just have to keep tabs and make sure they're staying on top of things.
And certainly, it's not, all sunshine and daisies and all of that. There's still some things that the Pac-12 needs to keep in mind, and that kind of exists in some of its protocols. It's still kind of enforcing social distancing among the players, even when they're, at the facilities working out. So that's why you're talking about them being in smaller groups, so that you can kind of enforce that. And also so that, a few different coaches, not the whole coaching staff, can oversee everything. Those larger team meetings will still be taking place virtually over Zoom or whatever these teams have chosen to use. The part of the protocol that stood out the most to me is that even during these workouts, face coverings must be worn at all times. And I don't know if any of you guys have gone for a run during quarantine with a facial cover on, but it'll gas you if it's the right kind of mask. It's not super easy to breathe super hard when you're working out and you have a facial covering on. So I'm interested to see how that part plays out. And then for the facility access, players are going to be tested for their temperature and negative symptoms before they come in every day whenever they try to access the facilities. So they're taking this stuff very seriously in terms of making sure that nobody is maybe coming in and spreading this thing. Obviously, one of the biggest issues that we could talk about is it being, transmitted asymptomatically for people who aren't showing symptoms. But there's not really all that much you can do for that, and testing for the symptoms is really the best course of action for them to take with it. And that applies, specifically to the weight rooms, working out in small groups in there, trying to minimize crowding, maintaining physical distance, because those weight rooms are places where this thing can be transmitted for sure. I think is kind of like the target area. So those were kind of parts of the protocol that stood out to me.
There's two things that kind of stand out that I kind of thought of when you said that. Is I think we have a really interesting perspective as student journalists, emphasis on student, and there's two things to look at there. One, athletics can't happen unless you have everyone back at your school in some capacity, right? And that's why I think a lot of these schools, you saw Utah just did it a couple days ago, they're going to have the bigger lectures, like you said, those team meetings, those bigger team meetings online. Think 200-person lectures, like your G8, your Gen Eds, like those, those basic, what are they called? The kind of just easy classes you have to take to get the major. And go through that and have that online. Those smaller classes or even lab sections of that are 15, 20 people you can have in person. Think of like dance classes. They can't do that in person. That allows for those smaller workouts. So I think this is a model we're going to start seeing kind of penetrate through other things as well, including schooling. And I think that's really important. You have to have those students back on campus, because you can't have student athletes without students. And that's one of the biggest issues here.
Do you know what it looks like in terms of a living arrangement standpoint? Is the school providing the housing as well, or do athletes have to find their own way in terms of when they get back out to the school? Is that on them to figure out where they're living and when they're not practicing?
I think that's more kind of in the realm of leaving it up to the schools, and that's what some other conferences have done. I know the Big Ten and ACC are kind of like bringing athletes back in for workouts and stuff up to the school's discretion. And I feel like the living spaces is something that is going to be more, under the school's discretion and what their choice is. I can't imagine, especially during the summer when there aren't going to be that many people on campus anyway, that the schools would be super adamant against having, athletes live on campus if that's where they are. But in the end, it is kind of up to those athletes to pick their living arrangements anyway. So I think there's going to be a lot more choice on the part of the school and on the part of the athletes for that side of it.
Like I said, this goes to the whole student thing too. You have to remember these guys are students, and how are these dorms going to work? I mean, you have dorms with 500 students in it. You can't have that probably, right? So do they run them at 50% capacity? How do they do that? I don't know. But one thing I do know is these athletes want to come back, and I can't imagine anyone on the football team that I know that doesn't want to come back. You look at some of these guys, go on the Instagram page of Greg Johnson. Every day he is on the field working out by himself, or maybe with one other person. But he is working out, and he's taking the initiative. Same thing with Hunter Eccles. So you look at these guys, like they want to come back. I have to imagine, I mean, they're giving their life up for football anyways right now too. So I don't know why this would stop them. I'm not saying that they should act recklessly in making their decision. I think this is something that you have to consider that is different from everything you've considered before. But I have a really hard time saying, oh, I don't want to play because of this. Like, they know that if they play, they're going to have a better shot of making millions of dollars, right?
Yeah. And I also think that in terms of living arrangements, it's also probably going to ease up some of the restrictions in the precautionary measures that they have in place right now. Aiden, you mentioned those facial coverings. You know, when you think about places that have eased restrictions on facial coverings, for example, when you go out to a restaurant, you're not wearing one when you eat, and you're technically sitting at the same table as the people that you live with. Okay, well, think about the guys who live together. If they're in the same dorm apartment style, you know, they're living together, they go out to practice, you know, at that point, you know, why almost like why bother if everybody's living in the same dorm? And yes, well, not all the guys on the team live together in the same on campus housing. Maybe that's a step you take for the first couple of weeks, at least before school starts. I mean, think about it as an elongated summer camp for football.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense for the summer, but how does that happen when you come to
the
the year? When the school year comes around, right? I mean, I guess you could take one of the dorms in the village, for example. I mean, you look at, I think it's Kale, the one in the village. That is overrun with athletes. You walk in there and you're going to see at least 5, you know, across sports, obviously.
Athlete housing.
Yeah. I mean, that's
I don't think that they made this decision with that in mind. I think they're thinking, how can we get athletes
back? They're not worried about that yet.
Trying to keep them in like the healthiest environment possible, because it is important to, you know, get them with their conditioning and their nutritionists and be able to have them work with that staff to make sure to keep them as healthy as possible. So I think that they're thinking, when the school year comes along, we will think about what housing looks like then, not only for the athletes, but just as part of the larger student population.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're looking for good news from USC football, this is certainly but some more good news. The USC Recruiting Trail for football is looking pretty darn good. Number 5 class for 2021 so far. Tyler, you did a little bit on the recruiting this week. What do you have?
I did, Sam. You know, everything is looking a little different right now, and the recruiting process is a big one that's getting hit without the possibility of traveling. Here's what we know right now. USC is hitting hard for running back prospects for the class of 2021, with the latest commitment coming from Brandon Campbell. Campbell's a running back out of Texas, which SC has been doing relatively well in grabbing players from there. But also like to point out that the potential reassociation of Reggie Bush in June could really help push not only recruitment as a whole, but particularly in that running back position. USC didn't take any new running backs in this year's recruiting class, but you look at the older guys, Levi Malapaya and Stephen Carr, there's going to be a big need for running backs in the 2021 season. It's definitely a good position to look for when they're going about recruiting right now.
That kid, Brandon Campbell, he's I really like him, not just for his talent. Obviously, as a football player, he's immensely talented, but he's so active on Twitter in trying to get other guys to come with him to USC. That dude, he has a future as a recruiter, man. Like, he's really he's really feeling the Trojan spirit already. That's what I really admire the most about him. You know, word on the street is that USC also has a pretty decent shot at Corey Foreman, the number 1 player in this recruiting class 2021. You know, he was a guy that decommitted from Clemson, wanted to reopen his recruiting. You know, rumor has it that he wants to stay closer to home. The dude played at Centennial. USC's right in his backyard, and apparently, you know, the buzz is that USC has a pretty decent shot at him. So yeah, it's definitely looking up in terms of recruiting for USC.
I mean, it's hard not to be happy with where they are right now. I mean, you think about, like, what is it, 6 months ago, the end of the season? Where were they, man? People were fuming, and then you bring in Todd Orlando, Vico Soto, Naivar, and then Dante Williams, of course. Jeez, what a spin around. And the one thing that still bites me is a running back from last year's recruiting cycle, Mike Drennan, the second, out of Ohio. I think he chose Kentucky. He was deciding between, like, USC, Kentucky, and one other school, I can't remember what, but that was a big miss for them. I think they need running back talent. I mean, you look at it, they have a lot of great running backs, but they don't have that X factor, and I think, granted, next year, someone like Marquise Stepp could step up, no pun intended there, and actually make a huge difference. You saw what he did in the Notre Dame game, and then obviously his injury really hurt. But I like Stephen Carr. He gets injured a lot. He's kind of inconsistent. I think Vi is great. I just don't think he's that X factor yet. I think they need to start really recruiting, and I think we're talking about the Reggie Bush thing. I don't know how much that affects it, because you ask any running back that went to USC after the Reggie Bush era, that is the reason they went there. They know who played there. They know the highlights. They know the story. They know everything about it. They chose USC because of Reggie Bush, right? he was their idol growing up. So I don't know how much it affects. Now, if you want to talk maybe later down the line after kind of things smooth out a little bit if he does reassociate, then you can talk about maybe he's recruiting for them now. He's getting on the phone. He's talking to these guys saying, hey, you need to do that. That's a lot more influential than just highlights, right?
Yeah, another point I'd like to make is you talked about the running game for USC. I don't know how many times I had to say it last year, but I wanted to see SC run the ball, and I think you hear a lot of people saying USC should get back to their roots in the running game, and obviously the air raid was great, but when you look back at who they're recruiting, 2021 running back Stephen McGee, who's also a Centennial kid. Right now he's committed to Oregon, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did the same thing that Corey Foreman did and decommit and explore some more of his options. He came from New York, bounced to Narbonne, I believe, and then now he's at Centennial. Hasn't had a chance to really play with that group of guys and that coaching staff, and like you said, that relationship that some of those guys have to pull recruits into the system. And then you look at who SC has right now with Drake Jackson, with Stevie Nomura, Williams, and Gary Bryant. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if they keep pulling more quality kids from Southern California. We love seeing what Campbell's doing in terms of getting those Texas kids. I think if we can keep pulling in those directions in terms of recruitment for SC, it should be an interesting recruiting class with 13 commits already right now.
Yeah, I think the running back position is the key that they need to go on. I haven't felt confident. I've covered USC football for 3 years, and I haven't felt confident in the running game since Ronald Jones left. And you had good guys there. You had Cedric Ware, Vise, Carr, and obviously Step now making his breakout last season. But I don't know. I think wide receiver U. I think USC could be wide receiver U in the sense of you look at that. Look how deep they are. Who doesn't want to go play in that system? If you're a wide receiver being recruited right now, they obviously landed Gary Bryant, right? Yeah, but if you're good, you're good, and they know how to develop guys at that wide receiver position. Look at how Pittman grew, look at how Vaughn's grew, and look at Amon-Ra. He's going to be an X factor for them next year. So I think that is, I think they do need to focus in on the running back position. I think that's one of the biggest flaws they have right now.
But one of those names, Sam, to me is the reason why I'm not too worried about the running back position. I think if you remember the Colorado game, they threw Amon-Ra in there at running back, and he broke off a 20-something yard run on the very first play of the game, if I remember correctly. And with that depth that they do have at wide receiver, I'm not saying that you start Amon-Ra at running back because he's a wide receiver. He's their best wide receiver. I think most of us agree. So I'm not saying that you start him at running back, but if you throw him back there in the backfield, and maybe you go 4 wide receivers along with him. You have Drake Jackson, or Drake London, I should say, Tyler Vaughns, Brew McCoy, and Kyle Ford. If those last 2 guys can kind of step into that spot, you're putting your 5 best playmakers probably out there on the field at one time if you throw Amon-Ra in the backfield. And he's shown that ability to produce from the backfield. So I think that he presents kind of a wrinkle and something that they could really use at the running back position, that along with Step, along with Levi, whatever Stephen Carr can provide you, I'm not too worried about that position right now.
Yeah, I just think I think that's just putting duct tape over a problem. I think you need to find a more permanent solution in recruiting the running back is there. And obviously, I'm excited to see what the defense looks like. I think linebackers could be a great place to recruit too right now for USC. Obviously, look at last class. Everyone's talking about how bad last year's class was, the 2020 class. But you look at it and those guys are freaking huge, man. They got offensive linemen and defensive linemen for days, and that's where they need the talent. So I'm not saying it was good. Please don't get in my mentions on Twitter again. I'm not saying it was good, but it's not doomsday. They got what they need. They have the skill position right now. They have wide receivers, and they have solid running backs that could turn into elite running backs if everything works out right. So I'm not too worried about them next year. Next year is the year. This coming year is the year. I'm convinced. I say Pac-12 championship win. Nothing less. There's no way. Who in the Pac-12 is going to stop them?
Are you predicting that, or are you saying that that's all they can accept?
Yes. If you don't get to a Pac-12 championship and win it with this talent against a terrible Pac-12 this year, who's the best? Who's gonna stop them? It ain't gonna be Utah. It's not gonna be Oregon. They got nothing left. They sent so many people. Nah.
Yeah, but nobody ever thinks Oregon has anything left, and then they come up with something, out of their sleeve every single year. I am excited to see what USC does this year. I think their roster is stacked with the right players, but it was that new coaching staff, and I that's where they're going to hurt the most from the time off, because you can give motivational speeches over Zoom to your players in these meetings, but how productive is that going to be and turn over into efficiency once we finally see season start late August? That'll be where it's kind of interesting to see. They did pick players they needed, and it was those big guys and how well they can develop those players, so that way we can see Keaton Slovis have another great season. That way we can see the wide receivers that are phenomenal in this year's team. I don't know. It'll be an interesting season as soon as and whenever it may start.
If there's any coaches that are going to get them ready in crunch time, I'm going with Todd Orlando. That dude's insane. I've said it 100 times. He is nuts. He's got a screw loose, and I love it. He is insane. The energy that guy brings. Dude, he ran. Who was it? Caught a pass in practice. The only practice we had this spring. Caught a pass in practice. Dude ran like 40 yards to go jump on him. I am here for it, man. But
my biggest concern with Orlando, and it's not an indictment on him, but more of the situation itself. He's definitely a guy, and all the people that he's brought in with him, they all emphasize this physicality, this violent approach to the way of football, right? Which it works, but you also have to have a system in place that's gonna work. You have to be in the right spots to make the plays. My biggest concern is that when the guys end up coming back, I really hope that cerebral aspect of the game is emphasized as much as, if not more so, than the physical aspect, because that's where there really could be lacking with all of this, time off and not on the field, actually going through this new defensive system. I'm sure he has the foresight to understand that and try to develop that. That's just one thing that kind of eats at the back of my mind. Is he going to be so concerned with the guys actually hitting each other more so than, being in the right spots on the field?
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I think it's definitely going to be a fun season to watch. We want to push on to our next topic. This is our first summer show in the history of sports scene, so sticking in first, at least the first time since I've been at USC and been a part of Annenberg Media, we are talking about hockey. Let's go! I'm so excited. Being from Michigan, grew up with hockey, played hockey all when I was little, so I'm excited to talk about it. The NHL has become the first major professional sports league in America to announce plans, concrete plans, actual plans that people aren't complaining about, to return. And they don't know when they're going to return yet. This is just what's going to happen when they return. And I want to use this as kind of a model for everything else when we're talking about the NBA. So what the NHL is going to do when they return, they're going to have a 24-team playoff. So it's normally 16, 8 from each conference. Now it's going to be 12 from each conference. And the way they're going to do this is the top 4 teams from each conference will have a bye in the first round, right? So the other teams, 5 through 12, will play in a play-in round. And while those teams are doing that play-in round, the top 4 teams will play in a round robin, so everyone else in their conference, to determine the seeding. So 1 through 4, and then you have 5 through 12 and play those 1 through 4. And the way they're going to do this, they're going to play in 2 hub cities. We talked about a lot of hub cities, especially when you're looking at the NBA. They're thinking about putting all their teams in one place. NHL is going to do 2 separated by conference, and then the conference finals and the finals will be in one location. So I think it's interesting to kind of look at. One thing, it really messes up with the lottery system. It kind of screwed a couple teams over, especially the Detroit Red Wings, because they were tanking this year, and now they might not have a shot. I mean, if you look at it, the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are the number 5 seed in this play-in round, could have the first overall pick. And it's not if they lose first round in this play-in thing, they could have the first overall pick, which would just be wild. But I know you guys aren't too adept on your hockey knowledge. So I want to use this as a jumping off point. Sure, don't lie to me. I want to use that as a jumping off point. Look at the NBA, look at the MLB. When they're coming back, the biggest thing we've heard from the NBA is that they're going to go down to ESPN's Worldwide Sports Complex and Disney, do this 16-team tournament, completely not reliant on conference, so you could just have the 16 best teams. Do you guys think the NHL's model is good, and the NHL, maybe even MLB, should follow suit when they get there?
My biggest thing is if the NBA wanted to increase the amount of playoff teams in the actual competing for the championship, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I like the idea of having a 16-team conferences playoff that puts the best 16 teams competing for a championship. I think that's something that they should have been doing, considering the disparity that we've seen between the conferences in the past. However, when we talk about increasing the amount of teams, it doesn't make sense because there's not, more than 16 teams worthy of making the playoffs in the NBA. I mean, the NBA is already a 30-team league. You're having over half the teams in the playoffs. Why would we increase that up to 20? I mean, what is the point of a playoffs if 2/3 of the league, per se,
because the season doesn't make sense. Nothing makes sense. This isn't a full season, right? Nothing. It doesn't matter at this point. Have fun with it. Try something new. See if it sticks. Dude, do a March Madness tournament. Put everyone in it. I don't care. That'd be awesome. I'd watch that.
Season. Yeah, but that the NBA has still played somewhere in the range of 70-something games. I want to say somewhere in the 60 to 70 range. That's a decent enough sample size to tell who's good and who's not. We don't need to add more teams and try something new when we've clearly had a pretty good enough gauge on who's a good team and who's a playoff-worthy team at this point. Adding more teams would only elongate the playoffs. You'd have to take these players away from their families for a longer period of time. On the fans, it's great to have more basketball to watch, but I think it's really it'd be disrespectful to the players in their time if we start adding, a team like the Portland Trailblazers, who frankly were not that good this year, to the playoffs. It doesn't make any sense.
They're getting paid for it. This is their job.
You guys want to come back, Reagan. Let's not act like we didn't have a meeting of 8 of the most influential players in the league, which included Damian Lillard from the Trailblazers, and that they didn't come to the conclusion that they want to play and they want to get back out there. If they have a chance to go out there and compete, I don't think that they're worried about playing a few extra games because they allowed a few extra teams in. And I want to address I want to kind of pile on with what Sam said in terms of the season being cut short. I think that the most important part of that, and why I don't agree with your assessment, Reagan, is the Memphis Grizzlies had the hardest remaining schedule of any of the Western Conference teams for these last few games. And you can say, it was only 15 games or whatever, but they were still in a tight race with the Pelicans and the Trailblazers and the Kings for that final spot in the West. And when you don't give those teams the opportunity to try to go to the playoffs, it's a bit of an issue for me. They were thinking, we're going to have these last few games to try to make a run at it. So if you increase the number of teams, try to open it up maybe to those other teams, and you can still go by just best record overall. It doesn't have to go by conferences. I totally agree with you on that one, but it just gives those teams the chance to kind of play in and gives them that opportunity that was taken away from them.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go with Reagan on the 16 teams. I think one, doing 20 or all 30 is too much, and then if you want to get into precautionary measures, 16 is gonna beat out 30. It's less people there down at Disney World, but I don't think it should be top 16 because then I say just top eight from each conference. Obviously, there's a bit of a disparity between talent in each conference, but then at that point, what if you did top 16? Are you going to not have somebody from the Eastern Conference in like your last 6 games? Like,
well, so I mean,
what happens there?
That's the thing with the NHL model is those play-in series are going to be 3 out of 5, right? They don't know what they're going to do with the round 1 and round 2 of the thing, but why not have even a 2 out of 3 series for the teams that are on the cusp, right? Because then you still.
And did you not hear you try to explain that whole breakdown? There's a reason no other leagues are doing that because it sounds so complicated, and you have to intently listen on kind of that whole playoff setup.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, really what it is think March Madness, right? With those play-in brackets, that's basically what it is, just 5 through 12, right? You have the majority of people playing in instead of the top who are just guaranteed in. You kind of flip it around, right? And I think that's a more viable thing because you still have teams that are eligible. I mean, what if you take teams that were you take everyone that was still able to make the playoffs under the original circumstances, right? and then you have those be the play-in, right? You have anyone that, clinched or was close enough to clinching that it wasn't even, going to be close. Like, they'd have to basically lose out and then everyone else win out. You have that, and then you create that ability to kind of say, okay, these guys still have their chance of making the playoffs, whereas these guys, they were never going to, and these guys were definitely going to.
Yeah, but even the NHL isn't taking everybody. I mean,
no, but they're taking 24 teams out of 31.
Not gonna be there.
I know, but 24 out of 31.
The NBA wants to talk about including all 30 teams. Like,
I just think that'd be fun.
What happened?
I think Sam is the one who wants to include all 30.
Yeah, Sam doesn't care about the team.
I don't think the NBA is in on that. Nobody wants to watch the Hawks in the playoffs.
Here's the thing.
Okay, if you're telling me if the Hawks make a run and you're not watching it, what are you doing? Why would you not want to see that? If they're so bad, they'll get knocked out the first round. What does it matter?
I'd want to see it, of course. I've been wanting to watch basketball for months now. I want to see it, but it's not fair to the dudes actually playing on the court. If I'm LeBron James, why am I wasting my time playing the worst team in the NBA?
Because you get $100,000 to play the game? I don't know. That's why.
The dollars that they paid me to play under the conditions that were already set. They didn't pay me to, make this new random thing to try to get more fans. Actually, I'm looking at my phone right now, and it's just popped up that 4 NBA teams, there's an option on the table for play-in, Sam. So to your credit, apparently it is on the table that they could have the option for teams that had a shot at the playoffs to play in. So I'm not necessarily mad at teams playing in, but increasing the playoffs, I'm not with that at all.
I think that the bigger issue with it is just the fact that if you stick with the normal structure, we already have rounds in the first under the normal playoff format where like the 1 seed is playing the 8 seed and nobody wants to watch it. It's just going to be a bloodbath. However, I think in this scenario it's different because there are those Western Conference teams at the bottom. I mean, who doesn't want to see Zion Williamson try to play LeBron and the Lakers in the first round? That would be awesome. And
I mean, who knows how these guys are going to come back
if they don't give them a chance to play into the playoffs. That's where I think you see it, is these Western Conference teams that are on the bubble that are still very good, still very entertaining, that people would want to watch. The Magic and the Bucks on the other side is whatever, but the Magic could still be in the playoffs. I'm just not going to watch those games because it's the Orlando Magic. But the Grizzlies, the Pelicans, the Trailblazers, even the Kings, these are teams that I want to watch.
I mean, I want to bring up one last thing before we push on to Reagan's hot take of the week. I think you have to look at college football too. And one of the things I know is there's not going to be a spring season. No one's going to go for that. None of the athletic directors, none of the conference officials, the NCAA, they're not going to go for that. It doesn't make sense. If it doesn't happen in the fall, it's not happening. Fine. Why are we talking about potentially pushing it back a little bit when that goes into flu season? Why don't we bring the season up, have a more expansive playoff, try a different playoff system this year? Do something like this. You take away all the non-conference games, right? And what that does is, one, limits player travel. So if you're really worried about taking, teams from LA like USC and putting them in games like in Dallas, where they come from LA, a super vulnerable city, to Dallas, not vulnerable, meeting Alabama, who could take it all back to Alabama, you eliminate that. And then you have this system where you go, okay, we take the top team in each of the Power 5 and an at-large bid and call it there. And then that's your playoffs. You move the season up, you try a new playoff system. People want it. People want a more expanded playoffs. I think this is a perfect time to try it.
How dare you, Sam? How dare you discriminate against the non-power?
Yeah, do you not want it?
I'm tired of it.
I'm just saying, okay, when's the last time... sorry, you're from Memphis, right? You're a Memphis fan? Yeah. Memphis Tigers? Yeah. When's the last time they were in a playoff? Or the championship?
Yeah. They should have, and not even Memphis, but UCF a couple years back. I think that team warranted an opportunity. They went undefeated.
Okay, give them the at-large bid. That's the purpose of the at-large bid. Put 3 at-large bids. Make it an 8-team tournament.
Oh, as long as my small schools they get a shot.
Sure,
at it,
I don't care.
Yeah,
sure, that's fine.
Make it 6 teams or something like that, and each of the Power 5.
Yeah, it's always nice to do a little charity, right?
However they want. 2 teams get a bye.
Charity team.
Sam, you don't want to see SC against Bama?
No, I do. I absolutely do. But I think it's ridiculous to talk about, we're so concerned about, people traveling and doing this, and then go and do, cross-country travel like this. At least you can keep it in the conference at this point if you're really talking about ways to limit contact between other schools. I want to see Bama more than anyone. I think USC has a decent shot at it.
Well, but then what happens, Mom?
I don't know. I'm just saying this is something.
Who does Notre Dame play?
Yeah, that's kind of a problem.
Like who?
Kind of forgot about that for a second.
They can just join the ACC for a year.
Yeah, put them in a pseudo conference. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Ooh. I don't know about that. Put them back. I don't know. Put them back somewhere. Put them somewhere. Anyways, I want to.
Pac-12. You said the Pac-12 is so weak anyway.
We're at 12.
They are. Anyways, Reagan, flaming hot takes every week. What do you have for us in the inaugural summer sports scene?
Hey, man, you know I always come with it. So, obviously, the Last Dance documentary, right? We knew that was going to ignite a lot of these debates about the greatest player of all time, the greatest players of all time, the top 5, top 10, top 20, all of that. We knew that would make a resurgence throughout this entire process. And one of the biggest things that the documentary itself did for me is help me to understand how we can quantify and define greatness and what makes a player great, right? Because it's not just the talent that they displayed on the court. There's a certain cultural impact that Jordan had, which is part of what makes his legacy so great. So in watching the documentary, I've been able to define how I define the greatest players of all time. And that's a culmination of the talent that you displayed, the accolades that you obtained over the course of your career, and then the overall impact that you left on both basketball and culture in general. And when looking at the greatest players of all time within that lens of those three categories, I got to say, man, Stephen Curry ranks ahead of Kevin Durant. And I know that comes as a shock to a lot of people because you look at Stephen Curry and you look at Kevin Durant, there's clearly a better basketball player between the two. There's clearly a more talented guy. That's Kevin Durant, but that's just 1/3 of what we're dealing with here. In terms of accolades, I'd give it about even. I might give the slight edge to Stephen Curry because although Kevin Durant's accumulated more accolades, I think that Steph has, higher rated accolades. He has one more MVP, the only unanimous MVP in NBA history, and he has another championship to his name. But when we talk about impact, man, that's what really edges him out for me on that list because I'm not sure that there's been a player throughout the course of NBA history that can lay more of a claim to having a larger impact on the way basketball is played than Stephen Curry, man. That we've seen this dude over the last 7 or so years single-handedly change the way basketball is played on the court, not just on one team. He didn't impact just his team, but the entire league. 30 teams play basketball differently than they did before because of Stephen Curry. For that reason, when you tell the story of basketball, right, Stephen Curry's name is a bit more important than Kevin Durant's. And that's why, he ranks higher on my list. I do have him at 9 and KD at 10, so it's really not that big of a difference. And KD obviously still has time to make up that ground. If he does something in Boston and they go out and mess around and win a championship, that's subject to change. But as it stands right now, Stephen Curry is the greater all-time player.
I think you meant Brooklyn because I wish that guy was on Boston. That would be pretty nice.
That would be great.
I'm going to have to disagree with you on 2 counts here. One, I think that you're not putting enough importance. You're not weighing the factors properly. I like that you're taking all these things into account, but the number one thing and the thing that you have to prioritize over everything else is impact on winning. I think that with NBA stars especially, but then also with NFL quarterbacks, in my opinion, winning can be classified as an individual statistic or an individual accolade, something that can be used to show who was the better player, especially with NBA stars. And when the Warriors were doing their thing, winning back-to-back championships, who was the player that won Finals MVP over Curry, and who was the one that pretty much everyone said these two guys are on the same team? They're both winning, the same, the games for these teams. It's Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is generally considered to be the better player. I think that the winning, you need to kind of weigh that a little bit more. And then also, let's not discredit Kevin Durant's impact on the game and his legacy in terms of changing everything. There's never been a guy who is 7 foot tall, who can handle like a guard, and who can pull up from 30. That is him, and that is who. That's why everyone's saying Emoni Bates. He's the next Kevin Durant. That's why people are looking for the next Kevin Durant. I think you're maybe underselling his impact on the game a little bit.
Here's the thing with that. You said the impact, and what I'm saying with Steph, right? Like we saw Steph do something, and now every team is trying to repeat that. there's not too many people that can walk the face of this earth and even attempt to repeat what Kevin Durant does because he's so special individually. Like, there's only so much that can disseminate, right? Amani Bates is probably the best doing it right now. You think about a guy like Brandon Ingram, but there's only so many people on earth that could ever even attempt that. Meanwhile, every basketball team ever can try to do what Stephen Curry did. And you talked about the winning. There's clearly like the best player, right? The more talented player was Kevin Durant. Obviously, when you look at that team play, he was the guy that was the most talented player. But I would dispute the fact that he contributed more to winning because the ultimate engine, there's a reason why that team went 73-9 before KD ever put on a jersey, is because the ultimate engine that made that team's system function was Stephen Curry. We talk about a guy, the concept of gravity, right? No matter where he is on the court, you have to account for where he's at, and teams flock to where he's at, making it open lanes for other teams to drive. There was a video that floated around on Twitter the other day, and it was Kevin Durant. He got a direct straight lane to the basket for a dunk, and the reason that it happened is because J.R. Smith saw a wide open Stephen Curry on the three-point line. He went to Stephen Curry, which opened up the lane for Kevin Durant. That's Steph Curry's impact to what he brings on the court. So although Kevin Durant was the more talented player, of course, and he did win those finals MVP, that's just a 7-game series, man. When I think about the 82 games who contributed more to that team being a winning team, that's Stephen Curry, man. His impact can't be understated.
I have a fundamental issue with your argument, and I'm not going to argue you on basketball because that's a fight I don't want to take. Coming from my basketball knowledge compared to yours. However, what I will say is I think you're when you're talking about the best or better than, you got to talk about talent, because we're talking about an actual skill base here. An impact on the game is something separate. If you want to talk about the most impactful player, let's talk about that. Jackie Robinson, most impactful baseball player, right? Okay, not the best, and that's fine. And that's how it is for a lot of players. You talk about guys that come in and change the play style of the game with that. Unless they're the only one that can do it, I don't know how it's different, because you see these teams shifting to a different play style, right? Whether it's the NFL, the NBA, whatever it is, right? They shift that play style, and then other teams start, getting more successful, right? That's my issue with it. If you want to separate impactful and best, cool. But I don't agree with just saying you can take best and say, oh, talent, but I'm weighing this in, and then it's just not an exact thing. If we want to talk talent, let's talk talent. If we want to talk impact, let's talk impact.
Argument, though, is, the reason that I have it, separated the way I do is that we don't have to isolate these things when we examine them. We can look at the culmination of what a person's entire career was and say, okay, they were this amount of talented, they garnered this amount of accolades, and they had this amount of impact on the game. That's what really culminates into what your legacy is. That's how great you are. We don't have to just look at somebody from a talent perspective and leave it at that. We can look at all of these other things and look at their career holistically and then draw those distinctions.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
I just disagree. I'm fine to disagree. I'm fine to agree to disagree. I just think you're wrong. And I'll leave it at that.
I agree with Reagan. It's we almost never make the distinction between most impactful and best player as far as talent goes. But Reagan, when you separate your three categories, which I think are great categories to base when basing off of who's the best. But when you look at right now, I think that's why KD is seen as a better player than Steph, because in those first two categories you listed, he's clearly more talented and a little bit, I would say, has more accolades. I mean, you're engaging off of which ones are more valuable than other accolades, but by far Steph has made the biggest impact on the game of NBA basketball, especially in the last 10 years. Now, when you want to look down the stretch, end of career, I think Steph would be the overwhelming better player than KD. But they both have a couple more years left, in their career. And I think if you can see Steph get a little bit further than KD in those first two categories, then it's not even going to be a conversation, because talent-wise, they're so close in comparison. You can't really make the you can't distinguish between the first two categories.
Yeah.
I just want to ask one more question before we wrap it up. And this is kind of the way that I view it is, to me, the most important part is who's going to win me the game, who's going to be the best player on the court and help me win the most games. I understand that the cultural significance, impact on the game, legacy, all of that is important. But I'm thinking about who am I going to take out of everyone that is going to help me the best. So if we're playing pickup and we have all the best NBA players in the world, who am I going to take? If I have a franchise and I'm picking between who to select at the beginning of their careers. Both of those examples, I'm taking KD over Steph, and that's kind of why I go with him on that.
That's fair. I think I'm just going to disagree and leave it at that. Thank God we went an entire show with Reagan and Aiden on it, not bringing up Bill Russell. So I want to congratulate both of you. No, we're wrapping up the show because we're not talking about Bill Russell. So guys, thank you for taking the time to be with me as always. I'm gonna kick you off this show, Reagan. I swear to God. Anyways,
so I can go on pause.
I love it. All right, we're back every week. We got a special show coming up next week. Whether Reggie Bush reassociates or not, we're expecting to hear a decision. I hope, please make it June 1st for the decision. Just get it over with. So we'll have a special show if he does or does not reassociate with USC. So stay tuned for that. We're going all summer, Wednesdays at 1 o'clock. We're keeping it going through the year. There's USC news. We don't stop. So guys, thank you again for taking the time to be with me. We'll be back next week. See you guys then.